Transgression and provocation are the engines of renewal. It is something that we cannot metabolize anymore, and today we will explore what happens instead. Oh, we can already hear the moral jury warming up, can't we? Not to decide a case or an argument, of course. No, we assemble today to decide a person. See, this interview was one hell of a watch. Don't worry, we won't watch it too carefully. The whole thing is 2 hours long, but it can really be condensed into much less. Piers isn't collecting information or trying to reason with Nick. He will tell us, obviously, that he's not looking for an ambush.
I don't intend it to be overtly hostile. I don't intend to ambush you. I intend it to be an examination of what you said on the record, an examination of what you believe or what you say you believe.
It's almost like a child telling you that they will not eat the cookies. But just like the children, Piers cannot help but reach for them anyway.
There was an episode of your podcast where you talked about your father and how he wouldn't take the family, including you, to certain restaurants because he believed they were associated with African Americans. What are we going to do for dinner tonight? It was a running joke. Me and my sister would say Applebee's, and my dad would say we would never eat at Applebee's. Not in a million years should you be caught dead, Fuentes said about Applebee's. Go to a different restaurant, a local restaurant. No Applebee's, no Red Lobster. That is commonly known as black fare. My family had a saying about Olive Garden that contains the N-word that we're not allowed to say. So my question, based on that anecdote, do you think you grew up in a racist environment, that your father was inherently racist, and that thought process moved to you?
Piers Morgan's intention here is of course not to reason with someone that he thinks is beyond reason. He's here today to sentence Nick Fuentes publicly. This format alone is not designed to discover truth. It's designed to chase a moral outcome. It asks the question whether or not we can treat Nick as only his ideas, or if he deserves to be a person.
There is a belief that you have 2 personas. There's one that you roll out now for podcasts and for shows like mine, where you come across as reasonable. And then there's your show on Rumble, where you often come across as having, a very unreasonable view on things.
But just like Piers is not here to win a debate, Nick likewise is not here to engage in one. At least not in the traditional sense, as we will see. He's there to test something much more dangerous and more important for us, especially if you're young. Nick wants to find out whether or not the social execution tools of old work on him anymore.
Unless you want to say that's another of your jokes, but you're basically saying, yeah, I'm a racist, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
You're fine with saying you're a racist?
Totally. I think everybody's racist. I think everybody, if we're being honest, is racist. I think everybody, the only people that aren't racist or pretend not to be are white people to their detriment. Everybody else is racist.
But earlier in the interview, you went...
See, an argument tries to change a mind, and neither of them are here to have it. Piers looks for a verdict, and a verdict tries to end a person. For the sake of this analysis, we should look at a TV studio such as this, like it's an ancient temple, that learned how to monetize shame. Piers assumes the role of the clergy. The audience is the congregation, and the ritual is the spectacle. Most of these mainstream formats are never there to challenge or destabilize your worldview. They are instead correction mechanisms. They affirm or attempt to affirm whatever environment makes them possible. Even if we remove any narratives or aspirations, this is in essence just a logical conclusion. If your job depends on the legitimacy of this temple, well, then you will not question the religion. You will make sure to decorate it instead. The way this is often done is by branding the opposition negatively. Piers and a lot of his peers try to highlight what they deem dirty to contrast it with their status quo. It lets them postulate that they are clean because this is dirty.
We can't be a conservative society as a whole anymore. Why we can't be proud of Europeans, why we can't be proud of being Christian. Because they've told us if you're too white and too proud and too Christian, it's going to lead to a Holocaust. And so my generation, our entire lives.
Honestly, Nick Fuentes,
and that's why people like me. That's why I'm popular, because this is bullshit.
Honestly,
yeah, it's a crock. We don't want to hear any more about me mom and me dad. That's a crock of shit.
No, listen.
Now the modern West loves to tell itself that it moved past superstition. But we all know superstition didn't die. It lives on inside the media that we consume. The mechanism for prosecution essentially stayed the same. We need a villain. We need a sacred taboo. We demand the correct expressions, and if we are denied, we escalate. And if we win, we parade our victory around as proof that our modern gods are real, of course. This is why these exchanges become so hysterical so quickly. Not only because everyone is very passionate, but because the disagreement is liturgical. This difference in perspective kinda changes how we perceive media as a whole, if you're not already there. Because an argument is quite risky, it might fail, but a verdict is very safe. It gets you applause, while an argument is really about truth, a verdict is more about moral jurisdiction. This sort of jurisdiction translates directly into power. Now that we have talked a fair lot about Piers and what he represents, we should take a look at how Nick actually engages with the accusations and the attempts to highlight him as a modern heretic.
You think that's funny?
It's funny. It's amusing what you're doing because, that one was a joke. But do you want to talk seriously about the Holocaust?
I do actually. I do because I just find it extraordinary that you would think the Holocaust could ever be something that we could joke about.
Why, too soon? Is it too soon to make jokes?
Piers cannot really stop asking, why does he say the things that he says? How can you say such things? Nick understands, and most of the audience as well, I presume, that attempting to answer normally is how you get captured. If you treat the studio like a court, then every sincere sentence becomes evidence for your wrongdoing. In a shame regime, this evidence then lasts forever, and you lose your personhood. So Nick is not really optimizing his speech to be understood, he is optimizing it to be unpunishable. We can literally watch him do this in real time.
You think Hitler was very fucking cool?
Yes, I do.
One of them.
And I'm tired of pretending he's not, to be honest.
This is the problem, you see. It's a bit like when you just say, I'm a racist. You're a racist, you think Hitler's cool, but you're not anti-Semitic.
He refuses remorse, he dodges any excuse, as he toggles between deadpan and irony. This makes him impossible to grasp for Piers, not because he's slippery, but because his position is inconceivable to Piers. And yeah, people might call this bad faith. Sometimes it is, but it's also necessary adaptation. Because if the room is built to convict you, then you stop trying to clarify. You start trying to survive. Piers wants a stable identity that he can nail to the wall, and Nick obliges him. He gives him something too heavy to nail properly.
And what do you mean by Hitler is very fucking cool? Because I think he's very fucking a monster.
Okay.
The more Piers pushes more pressure, the more Nick can treat it like proof of authenticity. To Nick's audience, condemnation is not a deterrent anymore. It's instead an endorsement, because they, just like him, were brought up in a world where their own experiences are denied and used to unperson them.
But now what you have in the city is that there's no accountability for the black people. And now Chicago has become a complete dump because these teenagers go out and they take over the city. They call them teen takeovers, but they all come from the same neighborhood. They drive up there and they mug people and attack people and they destroy cars and destroy shops. We had the Festival of Lights a couple of weeks ago. It's supposed to be a family event and they light up the trees and there's a big parade. I was in the parade one year and you had a bunch of black people there shooting each other. 7 people shot. A 14-year-old killed. And I know there's a lot of black people that feel the same way about this. They say, we've lost control of the city and we're looking for accountability.
That is why Nick isn't here to be understood. He's here to test whether or not he can be punished anymore. This approach breaks any rhetorical tools that Piers can muster. All that is left for Piers to do is to label him. But if that fails, the whole ritual starts turning into a circus. And you, Piers, you did not bring your uniform. This brings us to the real machine behind all of this. The thing that made all of that even possible. The clip economy. I suppose that's me in a way. See, the studio can be understood as a mine. Here the content is made. The internet, however, is the mint. Here, clips are refined. In the studio it's condemned and people are outraged. On the internet, however, this very condemnation becomes a trophy, and their outrage our entertainment. This is how you get stuff like this.
내 맘 다린다 holly 나의 아버지는 신발입니다 희락이 속에서
You take the most volatile sentence.
We're just tired of saying these kinds of things. We want to talk like real people and give our honest opinions. And then we literally get an old Jewish guy from England who's going to say, oh, that's not very funny, mate. Me mom. And it's like, shut up. Like, no one is in favor of genocide. So let's just get that out of the way. We're not in favor of a Holocaust or genocide.
Do you think if half your family
80 years ago?
You collapse the context because it will either be understood by the ones that need to understand it, or it will be unnecessary to those that don't care anyway. Then you compress it into a portable token and you launch it into the feed like a flare, and the fires are lit. And of course Rohan will answer. Now the boomer crowd gets outraged dopamine. Look at that, what a monster. The other crowd gets domination dopamine. Mad boomer? Nobody wants it to end, not really, not even me if I'm honest. The host gets moral credit, the guest gets attention, and the platforms they get engagement. The audience gets their stimulation. This is why.
And what do you mean by Hitler is very fucking cool? Because I think he's very fucking a monster.
Okay. That's a clip. I think he's very fucking a monster. Do you hear yourself?
Once condemnation becomes a trophy, you no longer deter any transgression. You professionalize it. But let's talk about, well, the unspeakable. Because this meta-analysis is not the only important thing.
You think Hitler was very fucking cool?
Yes, I do.
One of them.
And I'm tired of pretending he's not,
well,
to be honest.
This is the problem, you see. It's a bit like when you just say, I'm a racist. You're a racist who thinks Hitler's cool, but you're not anti-Semitic.
A lot of people misunderstand what's happening when Nick says, well, the forbidden thing. The post-war boomer clergy is itching to think that Nick's point is belief, or history, or a genuine ideological lecture. But we all know it isn't. Well, not really at least. The point is to highlight a sacred cow. There is a final taboo in the modern moral life, a sacred horror object, the ultimate browbeating stick, the thing that you invoke when you want the conversation to end and the other person to disappear. But what is a transgressor left to do in such a world? Well, Nick shows us.
How many people do you think died in the Holocaust? How many Jewish people?
I don't know. I'm thinking maybe 7 million. What's the number? 6 million, something like that?
So you
8 million?
You concede that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust?
Possibly more. Possibly, we're discovering all the time. So it could be, maybe even be more than that.
So why have you doubted the numbers in the past?
What's interesting about this is in many countries, it's not even legal to talk about it. And that's really where my interest in the Holocaust begins and sort of ends, to tell you the truth, is that if you wanted to question the number, you would be put in jail in about, 17 or 18 European countries. No other genocide, no other atrocity is treated like this. Could you imagine if in the United States they said the number of Palestinians killed in Gaza is 100,000, and if you don't say that, you're going to jail, you're banned on X, you can't have a job? That's the part that's totally insane.
He grabs the sacred horror object and flips it. Not because it's necessarily sophisticated, nor insightful, but because it demonstrates something. Your curse does not work on me, Piers. You can even hear the panic in the tempo after it happens, because Piers can feel it before he understands it. Oh shit, he's just sitting there, giggling at me, while I read out his top 10 most unhinged takes, and he affirms every single point and doubles down. Oh shit, oh fuck. Now Piers counters. If Nick doubles down, so will I. We need more humiliation, mockery, the little social elbow. The "are you proud of yourself" tone. Because if you can't force remorse, then you try to force embarrassment. Well, why does this not work on any young man anymore? Because a lot of young men feel like the world is run by rules that they are not allowed to name. We can all feel the asymmetry, we can feel the censorship, we can feel the moral blackmail. It doesn't matter if it's real or not. For people like Piers, if enough people feel it, it becomes real. Even after making their own experiences, they are gaslit and denounced into being unheard. When someone appears who can touch this nuclear taboo and not collapse, he becomes vindicated in a sense. Now Nick is not selling alternative history or nostalgia for evil. He's selling a feeling. Why was Hitler cool? Well, What a question. But the honest answer is why the young cannot and will not reconcile with the old. Right, Piers? Why was he cool?
What is very fucking cool about that? Tell me.
The edits, it's just cool. The uniforms, the parades, it's cool as a guy. You look at World War II and it's fascinating and it's interesting and it's compelling and it's cool.
What Nick means when he says it is that he's venerating the feeling of unashamed order, the feeling of hierarchy, the feeling of someone in charge that doesn't apologize for existing. The aesthetic of the Nazis, the uniforms and the military victories are deeply opposed to everything that Nick has been brought up in. See, Finkelstein asks Fuentes if he shouldn't be on Team Mum instead of Team Hitler.
If you're a Jewish person watching this, what are they thinking? I'll tell you what they're thinking, because I've got a friend of mine called Danny Finkelstein.
Since he says he's on Team Hitler, you might like to ask him about the fact that Hitler arrested my mum, tried to starve my mum to death, did starve my grandmother to death, sent my great aunt to the gas chamber, my great uncle, my cousin. My grandmother on my father's side ended up being 1 out of 7 children, the only one that survived the war. So you might ask him whether he wouldn't rather be on Team Mum rather than Team Hitler.
But Finkelstein, just as well as Piers, don't really understand that Nick has been brought up inside of Team Mum his entire life. The belittling and mothering bureaucrat ever present and ever reprimanding your transgressive explorations of reality. Piers and Finkelstein alike represent the overbearing mother instinct to a pathological degree. Let me translate for all the boomers. Why Nick thinks Hitler is cool. See, all of you grew up watching Star Wars, didn't you? Tell me, is a fleet of Star Destroyers cool? Or stormtroopers cool? Is it cool when the Grand Army of the Republic marches and the orchestra swells? Is the Imperial March cool? Is Vader cool? Is the Galactic Empire cool? Obviously it is cool. And you know what historic regime it represents? Oh, well, I guess you must all love the Jedi Purge.
Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do?
The destruction of Alderaan. Oh, by the way, did you know that my mother actually died in the destruction of Alderaan? How would you feel if your mother died on Alderaan, Piers? See how this feels.
What is very fucking cool about that? Tell me.
The edits, it's just cool. The uniforms, the parades, it's cool as a guy.
For Nick, of course, these events and the historic realities that he's describing are obviously more real than Star Wars, but they are far less real than his own lived experiences. There can be plenty of things said about Nick and his worldview, but his continuous defamation is going to be both his fuel and his biggest weapon against you. It isn't history that he's praising, it's the feeling of unashamed order that is used as a weapon against a shame regime. When a civilization refuses to talk about order like adults, then reality will sell it to the children. Nick and many decent Western men cannot cope any longer with the state of their civilization.
I sort of left this bubble, if you could call it that. When I went to college in 2016, I went to Boston University and I read a lot of things online and I realized the country does not look like LaGrange Park. It doesn't look like Western Springs or Hinsdale or Elmhurst. It looks very different. The country's undergoing a radical transformation because of immigration. And so I saw that and I said, this is not really a desirable change. I don't like the south side of Chicago or the west side or LA or certain parts of Boston as much as I like where I came from. And I guess that's what made me an American nationalist. I said, I want to preserve my home and the things that are familiar to me and the things I like about my home, what makes it America.
He, as well as us, is the end result of this grievance pipeline. It is the generational failure underneath all of this. A functional society has a corridor in which the young man tests his boundaries. He gets checked, he gets initiated, and then he can grow up. He does so by returning and integrating his experiences back into the structure. This corridor matters because transgression is not just vandalism, it is also exploration. It's how a civilization can find out if its taboos are real or if they are just inherited nervousness.
So why
Upwards of 10.
have you doubted the numbers in the past?
I'll tell you why. I really think that every death is a tragedy, however many Jewish people died in the Holocaust. And I'm not a World War II historian, so I'm actually open to believing the official narrative, and I've read some of the conspiracy theories. And to tell you the truth, it's a rigorous debate. But you know what's interesting about this is in many countries, it's not even legal to talk about it. And that's really where my interest in the Holocaust begins and sort of ends, to tell you the truth.
But modern institutions deleted this corridor. And now you test a boundary, then you get branded, and then you can never return. There is, at the end of the tunnel, no reintegration, no adult correction, and no path back. There's just permanent identity assignment. Your grievances, well, they're just a crock of shit.
In our entire
what a crock
lives,
of shit.
Your character, literally Hitler. Your experiences, laughable.
Says the guy, have you ever had sex?
Did you even have sex? Like, honestly, I cannot get over that he genuinely asked that. Nick, are you maidenless? No maidens? Opinions not allowed then. But honestly, what happens at the end of all of that? See, if you tell people that there is no way back anymore, they just stop trying to come back.
And I'm thinking in the back of my head, you know, I think I'm gonna give up my life of hatred and racism. I mean, maybe these Jews and women and blacks aren't so bad. But then they prove me right. My former life of hatred and anti-Semitism is completely vindicated. I am doubling down. More anti-Semitism, more Hitler, more racism, more sexism. You banned me from the club? Well then, now we're going even harder than ever. You took that away from me?
Exile becomes their identity, and this identity becomes a tribe. A tribe becomes a new crew, and Nick's crew keeps getting bigger, cause
Jesus Christ is...
I'm kidding, of course.
this is how you get Nick Fuentes types. Not because he's some inexplicable demon that fell from the sky, but because the ecology is producing him. You are making him, Piers. It is the environment that you have cultivated that makes him like that. All the sacred cows, the more sacred they become, the more fragile they become. When something cannot be questioned, it stops being real, even if it may be true. This is amplified by the fact that banishment isn't just social anymore, it is now logistical. Platforms, sponsors, employees, payment rails, search visibility and distribution. It's not just people don't like you. It is rather that you can't exist.
You weaponize this stuff.
You know.
You weaponize this stuff for money, but you know when you say something
please.
like what you
I'm
just said.
banned from banking.
You
I'm
know
banned from banking and credit cards. You know who you're talking to?
The ritual doesn't just attempt to end your reputation, it attempts to end you functionally. Because everyone watching learns the lesson. To keep quiet, to not touch the taboos, to not ask the wrong questions, and to definitely don't associate with the wrong people. The compliant, they speak in approved phrases, and everyone else moves into hidden spaces where taboo becomes bonding and resentment becomes substitute for belonging. Banishment has stopped being a metaphor and became infrastructure. But once this happens, you don't create a healthier public square anymore. With each deviant that you remove, you create a black market. And black markets don't breed moderation, Piers, they instead breed hardened subcultures with wares and goods beyond your comprehension. But let's reverse engineer the pipeline. The studio creates the condemnation moment. The click economy turns it into currency, influencer incentives reward volatility, and then it gets consumed by young men in packs, as proof that the world is fake and the priests are liars. In such a shame-based system, selection pressure is obvious, because the selection pressure is the shame itself. But by shaming enough people, you select for the man that can metabolize your disgust into fuel.
He is right about the two personas. And I think that everybody understands this on some level. On my show, I make jokes and I use rhetoric and I'm hyperbolic. Because for a long time, I had an audience that was small on these like dissident platforms. And so I had a small following and we had sort of like an in-group sense of humor. And you talk about it one way on a freewheeling live stream when I'm by myself and I'm ranting and we make jokes and we play devil's advocate, we play with different positions. But then when you sit down in an interview like this one, and people ask me a good faith question, what do you actually believe? Well, then I clarify and I say, well, here I'm not joking, here I'm not being hyperbolic, I'm not being rhetorical. I'll tell you precisely what I believe.
And when return is impossible, exile stops being a tragedy. It becomes a stable identity. You have now made your shame selection mechanism apply the maximum evolutionary pressure. Out the other end comes Nick Fuentes. Good job. The more you try to shame him, the more he can turn it into a badge. The more you condemn him, the more he can farm it. And a stable identity in a market economy of attention becomes a product. One that you have made scarce and thus infinitely valuable. Thus, for this Stop in the Sun series, we looked at the transgressive son. He is a civilization of function, and I have a very big place for them in my heart. He pressure tests sacred claims, he probes brittle narratives, and he forces hidden rules into the open. If a society can metabolize this pressure, it initiates the young and grows stronger. But if pressure is criminalized, if every boundary test is treated like a moral war crime, then pressure does not disappear. It returns as rupture. This is the real curse of deleting the institutions that allow for initiation. At the end of the day, if you don't allow transgression to be metabolized as initiation, you will meet it again as revolution. And to explore this further, next time, we go into the spaces where the exiles gather, the holy places, the pack formation, the subcultural monasteries where irony becomes law and resentment becomes identity. Nick Fuentes is the logical conclusion of the world that we live in, but that doesn't make him the right outcome. He's not like the young boys in Mr. Keating's class from last episode, rising up despite their teacher's warnings. We have been denied to be like these young boys. To rectify this, we need to give up on our shame and start exploring no matter the cost. Until next time at least, where we meet in the Wolf's Den. Thank you for your time.